Good day, everyone. By the way, I am Andrea B. Munsad, your discussant for today's lecture. And today, I'm going to tackle about test specifications and criterion reference assessment. Educational tests yield scores, and a score needs to have a meaning. If a student takes a test and receives a result of 10, then a natural question arises. What does the 10 represent? There are two classic answers to this question: the norm referencing and criterion referencing. But what is the difference between norm reference and criterion reference assessment? Or norm referencing and criterion referencing? Norm reference assessment compares the student to the expected performance against peers within a cohort with similar training and experience, while criterion reference assessment focuses on the candidate's performance of the task against a set of criteria related to the knowledge, skills, or attributes that the candidate is developing. The earliest work on normative testing dates from the late 19th century, when Galton built his anthropometric laboratory and addressed the question of why people need to be measured. For example, he wrote about human eyesight. Measurement would give an indication of the eyesight becoming less good, long before the child would find it out for himself, or before its impairment could attract the observation of others. Such a stance is normative because it views eyesight in relative terms. Less good. To return to the opening question above, the norm reference meaning of a 10 on a language test would be the rank of the test taker in a group of peers, the norm group. How many scored above 10? How many scored below? And more crucially, what is the normative score value for some particular decision, such as admission to or exit from a particular language program? In a classic paper, Glaser coined the notion of criterion referencing, which nowadays is typically defined in contrast to norm reference testing. A problem arises when a test is given after an instructional sequence, such as a module or unit in academic semester-long class. In such a case, the score range may be very narrow. That would be exactly what a teacher wants in an achievement test. Very little score spread because it shows that the teaching was successful. The teacher's chief concern is about the skills and abilities that the students can demonstrate, the criteria against which they will be measured. If the entire group of students can display mastery of the entire suite of criteria for a particular teaching unit or module, then the variation of scores could be even be zero. there may have been 10 separate skills in the teaching module, and all of the students performed all 10 skills flawlessly, and so all of them scored 10. In contrast to norm referencing, there would be little reason to rank and to compare the students. If they all achieve, they all get full value. This distinction led to a body of criterion reference statistics. If a score of 10 on a language test is deemed to be a passing mark on a criterion reference test, the presumption is that a 10 indicates mastery of a sufficient number of skills in a very well-defined domain of language ability. Unlike normative item statistics, criterion reference statistics look at the dependability of judging mastery and view that dependability in much the same philosophical light as reliability in normative testing. How trustworthy is that 10 as an indicator of mastery? Over the years, the chief legacy of criterion referencing seems not to be its body of statistics. Few testing companies utilize or report criterion reference item analysis. To the knowledge of this author, rather, the legacy of criterion referencing lies in its impact on communication of test results, because criterion referencing places strong value on clear definition of the skills to be tested. Today's standard-based educational system demand that language tests have thick score reports. Figure 13.1 shows a sample modern score report. Many of the modern techniques to calibrate and track the standard descriptive language derive historically from criterion referencing's emphasis on skills rather than the spread of scores in a distribution. Criterion reference test development focus attention on particular skills and abilities. Operationalization is the challenge of putting an ability into measurable terms, and it is featured centrally in criterion reference testing. Criterion reference test development focus attention on particular skills and abilities. Operationalization is the challenge of putting an ability into measurable terms, and it is featured centrally in criterion reference testing. The chief tool for operationalization is a test specification. A test specification is a generative blueprint from which many equivalent test items or tasks can be produced. Perhaps the earliest mention of test specifications or specs dates to Roche. Well, prior to Glaser's paper that coined the term criterion reference, test developers realized the standardized testing needed to control test tasks so that new and equivalent versions of tests could be developed, trialed, and normed. Early conception of test specifications reflected then prevalent normative views of test development, and the goal of these early specs was to generate tasks of varying difficulty levels. Varying difficulty levels. These specs also provided information about the particular skills in a test. How many test items are needed for each skill? Often, the information was set forth in tabular form. A table of specifications. A table of specifications is a very valuable tool, and it is still widely used in many test development settings. For example, the table may tell the test developer that 10 multiple choice comprehension questions are needed for a test of reading. 5 texts, 2 per text, 1 each to test a main idea and to test a specific textual inference. However, it has a drawback. It does not provide adequate detail to generate test questions that say much about mastery. It is not a tool for operationalizing an ability. What is a main idea? What is textual inference? What is textual inference? Criterion reference test specifications originated in the 1970s and provide that level of detail. Modern test score reports obtain their richness in part from their bank detailed test specs. And if the test will serve a normative function, and many do, then it is no longer accurate to say that detailed test specs are the sole province of criterion referencing. They have become part of all good testing practice. Detailed test specs can come in many formats and design. All formats share two common elements: the sample test task and guiding language about how to produce such samples. The uh, Such criticism is typical practice in spec-driven test development. A spec really does not stabilize until it has been exposed to extensive and reflective criticism among test developers. Feedback makes specs better. Furthermore, the team should be able to look at the spec, to reflect on its accumulated expertise and opinions, to critique it and to improve it, all without trialing the test items. As mentioned previously, it is costly to try out test items, and in some test settings, trialing is not typical. For example, a group of teachers at a language institute may regularly gather to discuss their students and classes and exam. I'm sorry. As mentioned previously, it is costly to try out test items, and in some test settings, trialing is not typical. For example, a group of teachers at a institute may regularly gather to discuss their students and classes and exams. In such a setting, it is doubtful that the institute can invest much time in trying out test items to improve the test. However, the institute can invest part of its coordination and planning meetings to the planning and refinement of the test, and such decisions can focus on test specs. The institute's test its specs actually can grow and evolve and improve from feedback obtained at regularly scheduled discussions. This process is spec-driven test development. Its key characteristics are it is generative. It means that the spec is intended to produce many equivalent test items or tasks. Second, it is iterative. The spec evolves over time and proceeds through versions. And lastly, it is consensus-based. It means that the spec is co-authored by a team. And spec-driven test development is probably standard practice in most large commercial and government testing operations. And now, why do we need specifications? It ensures fairness, validity, and reliability. For fairness, all test takers have an equal opportunity to demonstrate their ability. While in validity, the test measures what it claims to measure. And lastly, to reliability, the test measures equally under similar conditions over time and cohorts. And that's all for our lecture about the test specifications and criterion reference assessment. Thank you.